What's up, world? Back again. I mix what I like. I mix what I like.org. I'm Jared Ball. And of course, we wanted to talk again with Dhoruba bin-Wahad, longtime activist, former member of the Black Panther Party, former member of the Black Liberation Army, political prisoner, and still active organizer. Dhoruba, well, first of all, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me back, Jared.
Well, so as we were just talking, we wanted to talk with you about in the aftermath of yet another set of police killings, and a lot of the conversation seemingly now in popular media shifting from the violence committed by police to now violence committed against police, and some of the reaction of those in the broader Black Lives or movement for Black Lives world. Wanted to have you come on and just talk a little bit about the history of the Black Liberation Army, one, and then and using that example in that history to talk a little bit about how you think activists and just people interested in understanding what's happening should interpret and then respond to what, again, I'm arguing is the shift in media emphasis from the violence of the state to now armed struggle against the state. But so if we could start with that, Dhoruba, if you could just talk a little bit about the history of the Black Liberation Army, and then if you would just shift into what you see happening now, similarities and differences as you see them.
Well, the Black Panther Party started out as an organization to defend the Black community from police attack, from racist police brutality. And a lot of people don't know that when Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party, they initiated patrols of the police, with armed patrols, with a law book, and they would stand a legal distance away, and they would advise the person that was being stopped or harassed by the police of their rights. The police didn't like this, and the police, after several confrontations with the armed Black Panther Party, they moved to have the open carry law change, so that you couldn't carry a weapon openly in public. This was known as the Panther Act in California. So Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton sent a delegation to the California Capitol, armed delegation, to protest this law when it was being heard. And this resonated across the entire country. Black men with guns at the state capitol. Now, you would think that the NRA at that time would have came out and supported the rights of black men to openly carry guns, but the NRA, in fact, supported the bill against the Black Panther Party. And the message that the Black Panther Party was trying to send out was that we had a right to self-defense. We had a right to own guns and defend ourselves, and develop in our communities the ability to police ourselves and defend ourselves. And that the police were in our community basically as an occupying force. That they didn't live in our community, they didn't have our interests at heart, and they were brutalizing us, and they were murdering us. Now, this was in 1966, okay? And so, from that point on, the whole issue of black self-defense throughout the civil rights era, throughout the human rights era with Malcolm, the whole issue of black self-defense has always been subsumed and concealed in this notion of black criminality, that black on black crime. I mean, the whole idea, the notion to turn black on black crime was invented in the 60s in order to combat our right to self-defense. It was invented, and it was advocated by black poverty pimps. They were the first ones to come out talking about, well, don't talk about the police just killing us. The police ain't the only ones killing us. Black folks are killing each other. And then they throw out that false flag as if, white folks kill each other every day. We don't call it white on white crime. They had two industrial wars, World War I and World War II, where more people were killed than any other period in human history. We don't call those two wars white on white crime. It was white folks that started all of that shit. It was white folks that was killing each other. You understand? So we don't call it that. But because we understood that it was state violence, it was the violence between two states that were organized and as entities. This was war, and so when we all throughout the 60s and the early 70s, the issue of black self-defense was always put off as if the individuals who would stand up against the police, who would stand up against racist attack, were somehow crazy. They were the staggerlees in our community. They were, the buck wilds and the hoodlums and the thugs, that everybody was basically scared of them, including the police. You see, so they try to paint those people who would resist into that corner. And during slavery, during the Bulwick days, they did the same thing. There was a reason for hanging black people and leaving them hanging on the sides of the road who resisted. That was to send a signal of terror to all black folks. This is what happens to you when you resist. Okay. Now it's impossible. It was really difficult for them to do that with an urban guerrilla who would ambush them, who would shoot them, and they wouldn't have nobody to hang up. So they had to demonize these individuals as crazy. But if you notice that when the BLA first came into prominence in 1971, there was a series of police murders in New York. I think Clifford Glover. There was a series of police murders in which the police got off scot-free. Just like now, they shot down one kid. He was a 12-year-old. They killed another 15-year-old kid. The police said he caught an epileptic fit and pulled the trigger and couldn't let go of the trigger. All of this crazy shit, this crazy stuff, and the police got off. And when in New York, the Black Panther Party tried to put on the referendum on the ballot community control of police. Tried to get it passed legally on the ballot. The PBA spent millions of dollars for a campaign to get the electorate electorate in New York to vote against this bill. And they said, vote yes if you mean no, vote no if you mean yes. They put up all this campaign about how the police weren't pigs. They were basically good people. They did all of this stuff. And then they put up an alternative. They said, if you really want control of the police, vote for the Community Review Board. And not community control, not decentralization. And the people went for it. They voted for Community Review Board. And they went ahead and instituted the Community Review Board where the mayor appoints most of the people, the police chief has a representative on the board, and then they went on to continue to kill and murder us for the next 20 years. And nothing would ever happen. The Community Review Board was basically useless. Okay, but it was a template for how they would deal with these types of grassroots demands for control of police. We'll throw the Community Review Board out at them. We'll trot out a couple of community leaders that we pay off. We give them a grant. We run them for the community board. We put them up there, and we go on as business as usual. And that's exactly what they did. But now the situation is different because you had the crack epidemic came along, the drug wars came along, and all of this served as a smokescreen for the militarization of the police, and served as a ruse for the mass incarceration or the pushback against voter rights. People don't understand that in the urban north and in the urban areas, the pushback against voter rights and the Civil Rights Act was the mass incarceration of unemployed black folks, was mass incarceration. It wasn't mass training. It wasn't trying to get people jobs. You had this massive unemployed population, mainly in urban areas, and now they had the universal vote. And now they could really vote. And what if they decided to vote for a candidate that really represented them? What if they just organized their own independent political party? What if what if all of these things? So the only way to lock them in to the duopoly of the Republican and the Democrats was to push back against this. And to push back against it was the war on crime and the war on drugs, which filled up the prisons, which helped empower a whole new black middle class and new black leadership. The Charlie Rangels, the John Lewises, all of these individuals came to prominence during the war on drugs, during this whole pushback against black civil rights and black self-defense. So now that we have reached the stage where we know that since the murder of that young man in California on the BART or New Year's Eve, Oscar Grant, that from that point on, that there was an entire generation in this country that began to say no to this type of way of growing up. this type of environment. They were sick and tired of it. And gradually you would see that they would begin to mobilize. First it was around Oscar Grant. Then it was around the Latino brother out there in the Bay Area that was killed. And then it's been constantly building up over the past 5 years until it finally exploded after St. Louis into the Black Lives Matter movements that we see now. And it's ironic that the leadership of this movement came from various segments of our community that didn't find a solace or a welcome in our community. It came from the LGBT people in our community. It came from people from gay and other marginalized community, homeless people, people that really had no place even in the black community as it was constituted over the past 10 years. So these are individuals, and they define their resistance as intersectionality. There's different levels of oppression, and they want to address them all, and that's cool. But one thing that they're adamant about that their lives, Black lives, matter. And that this country has never considered black lives, has never considered the humanity of black people, has never considered the humanity of anybody but white folks, and that those days are over and they're not down with that anymore. So what has happened is that now that they're in a position of having gave voice to an entire generation, they're dangling between being co-opted and being brutally repressed. This is where they're at right now. The government wants to demonize them, and in order to stop their growth, and at the same time they have carried forth a message which is constant demonstrations, staying in the face of these people that have touched brothers and sisters on the streets, that have touched the gangbangers. The gangbangers on the streets are now questioning, what are we doing running around with all these guns shooting each other? They're starting to question this. This is when a movement takes over. This brings me back to my Battle of Algiers analogy. Black Lives Matter is becoming a force amongst the generation of young people. You understand? It's beginning to even infect their lifestyle on a whole different level. It's not just the educated college kid that's walking around with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. It's not just the gay and lesbian woman that says Asada taught me. It's not just that. Now you got brothers from the hood in St. Louis walking around talking about black power, walking around talking about, man, if they're going to kill us, we're going to shoot back. You got all of these forces that have been galvanized by the fact that these young people from Black Lives Matter and these other organizations have stayed in the streets and refuse to leave the streets. That's what changed this whole dialogue. They refuse to come in out the cold. And everybody is doing all kinds of tricks, all kinds of stratagems to get them off the streets. You have the mayor in Atlanta talking about let's have a moratorium on demonstrations and come in and let's sit down and talk. You have the president of the United States convening a sit-down session with police chiefs and Black Lives Matter advocates that they feel are safe, that they can let into the White House, they can let into the White House without them taking their shoes off, and so you have all of these folks to sit, and the only reason they're in the streets, only reason they're there is because black folks refuse to leave the streets. If they would have left the streets and stopped demonstrating, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Okay.
Barack Obama and Kasim Reed are just trying to show the power of a black elected official. That's all they're trying to.
Well, they don't have no power.
The power and the value of black elected officials. Well,
their value is that is that they bootlickers and that they're just bootlickers. But I'm just saying the obstinacy, the obstinate nature of Black Lives Matter and these young activists. Their refusal to let people go on with their lives as usual. Their determination to use their demonstrations to make other people uncomfortable in order to deal with the issues is a perfect strategy. It's a perfect strategy because it has led us to have this dialogue now in an election year where now the mass media is talking about the country is coming apart. They wasn't talking about the country was coming apart as long as we was getting killed. You got to remember that all the times the police were getting acquitted and coming back, no indictment, acquittal, they wasn't talking about the country was coming apart. They was talking about there was just this perception divide between the police and minority communities. They was putting it all up there in some vague shit. Now the country is about to self-destruct over race because of what? Because some kids stayed in the streets and refused to leave. If it was that vulnerable to self-destruction, if Bernie Sanders could run for office and all of a sudden bring in millions of people into his campaign who voted on the idea, the concept, or the principle of socialism, where did all these people come from knowing what they know about socialism all of a sudden? This sentiment has always been out there. People have always understood, or do basically understood, the difference between right and wrong, between what's fair and unfair. People do have that instinct, but it's the media and the state who distort the dialogue and the parameters of the debate so that people are confused about what's right and what's wrong. So they're arguing a position that's totally ahistorical. They're arguing about, when somebody says the police have to be abolished, they says, all right, yeah, right, abolish the police. And who are you going to call when your husband beats you up? They missed the whole goddamn point. The reason why you calling the police is because you in the police state. If you had community control of public safety, there'd be somebody else you'd be calling, who'd be showing up there and say, look, man, look, why don't you sit on one side of the living room and you sit on the other side of the living room? Let's try to resolve this. You understand? I got some people here that'll feed the dog, and maybe we could send the kids over to the child care center. Okay, so now what's happening? Instead of, sir, you want to stand on the side, you want to turn around and handcuff him, and you go out. That's their solution. You call the police. The police are moaning about they got too much work. There's too many things that they're called to do. Well, you close down the mental health facilities. You understand? You remove people from the social safety net. You did all of this shit, and then you want to call the cops on them when they bug out. And then the cops are telling you, man, why are you calling me because you got a naked man out in the street butt naked. He should be in a mental institution. But you closed the mental institution and you gave the cop the money. You gave the police the money. Now, don't make like you took the money and when you closed this institution and you built better schools or you built better roads. You didn't do that. 60% of the budget in most municipalities go to public safety. All of this money is going into the fucking police, and all they can do is shoot us? I mean, really? So you saying that they got too much? I agree, they got too much work to do. This is why we need to decentralize public safety. This is why we need to take the command and control structure of public safety, seeing that you redlined us and you put us into these gerrymandered districts. So now these districts should be public safety districts. You understand? And we should have a public safety board. And each public safety board should have its own public safety officer that determines the policing for that district. If we got a problem with children not being in school and hanging out during school hours, our objective is not to run them in the joint, pat them down and have them laying on the streets and treat them like criminals because they got a joint in their pocket. You understand? We have to deal with the fact that the schools is like a prison. We have to deal with that aspect of it. We have to deal with those parents who are homeschooling. Can we expand that and get them some more funds? The cop down the street should be living down the street from that charter school. Because if he was living down the street from that charter school, niggas wouldn't be hanging out in the corner smoking weed in front of school because they know Popo lives right there on the stoop. You ain't gonna diss Mr. Murphy, you understand? Because he will lock your ass up. You understand? So we need to have a whole different approach to the situation of public safety. So when somebody says abolishing the police department, you have the right wing that says, well, they the first ones that you're gonna call when you're in trouble. When the Black Panther Party was in the Harlem community, the police didn't call the police. People didn't call the police first. They didn't. They would call us if they were having an eviction problem and with the landlord. They didn't call the police. They called us. Because we provided an alternative idea, an alternative institution, an alternative methodology for them to deal with problems that were specially, uniquely theirs. These are unique problems for us. I think that there are a lot of parallels between now and the late 60s in 1968, 69, when Richard Nixon was running for the presidency. You know, he declared himself, much like Trump, as the law and order president. As the law and order candidate. We knew back then that the term war on crime and soon to become war on drugs that he ushered in was basically a war on Black America, a war on black people. and it was used as a ruse, as a pretext for the militarization of the police, and it had on its side a lot of black so-called responsible leaders who looked at the situation in the black communities in terms of high crime rates, poverty, lack of opportunity as a threat to the status quo. And then at that time, you had a war. The United States was involved in a war in Vietnam. It had a very vibrant and vocal anti-war movement, mass movement in the country. So the ruling elites in this country at this particular time in 1968, 69 were much at the same crossroads they are now. But of course, now you have the social media, you have technology that has developed to the level where we are literally a global village. We have instant communications. People are well aware of things that happen simultaneously. Everybody has a camera in their pocket. So communications and the ability to communicate has transformed the whole political and social landscape. Now, having said that, I think there's a lot of significant differences. And one of the significant differences is that you have the Black Lives Matter movement now that has sprung up, that has inspired an entire generation of young black people, that have brought a whole new generation of activists into the streets to struggle for what they consider their human rights and their human dignity. And this movement has as its roots the generational experience of millennials, the generational experience of young people who've grown up in the last, or who come to age or to their young adulthood in the last 10 years, last 15 years. And you've had a number of organizations and individuals and groups on the scene for the last 15 to 20 years that help facilitate the whole idea and the concept or the notion of mass incarceration. We had black leaders that actually called for more policing in the community. We have black elected officials that collaborated with the police unions to get the type of unaccountability that the police now enjoy when they kill black people. So we need to understand that it's the current class of leadership and class of black leaders, clergy, political leaders, community spokespersons, whose watch mass incarceration and the militarization of police has occurred. Okay? Now that the younger generation has been victimized by this, has been targeted by this almost all of their lives, almost all of these young people have been stopped and frisked and harassed by police. It's nothing new to them. Now that they stood up against this, the hue and cry now is to reform law enforcement. To equip them with more body cameras, to give them better sensitivity training, to involve them more in community policing. We've had more black policemen, black cops come out of the woodwork in the last week since the Dallas shooting than we could imagine. And these black cops have come out in all types of supervisory positions. They're the head of this fraternity or that corporation. And they're all expounding on the role of law enforcement in the black community. When in the final analysis, all of this started, when we look right back on it, all of this started when black people asserted their Second Amendment rights. When they stepped forward and said, we have a right to defend ourselves against the police and against a white supremacy. And now we need to see where the conversation has gone. We have President Obama, a black man, standing in front of the world saying that there's no excuse, there's no reason to shoot law enforcement officers. Whereas it's written in the Declaration of Independence, the complete opposite. And he's a constitutional lawyer. It's written in the Declaration of Independence that when a nation or a government invents a design to oppress or exploit its people, that the people have a right to rise up and overthrow that government and implement a better form of government that is more conducive and compatible with their rights and their human rights. It says that in the Declaration of Independence. So I don't know where he's talking about people don't have the right to challenge law enforcement. It was legal in the days of slavery to kill and hang and capture Africans who could not be accounted for. This was legal. Chattel slavery was legal. The murder of my great-great-grandfather and your ancestors was legal. So if you're saying that Nat Turner didn't have a right to rise up and kill the militias that were hunting them down, then we are arguing legality and morality here. We are arguing what is morally right and what is ethically right. And this is not to say that I'm advocating or saying that the shooting of policemen is a solution to our problem. That's not what I'm saying. What I am trying to say is that law enforcement, as it's presently constituted, has evolved to where it has evolved as a result of the conspiracy between black elected officials, black community organizers, and white supremacy to maintain a system of control over unemployed people, over a population of unemployed, poverty-stricken, marginalized, and disempowered people, to maintain a level of control and intimidation and terror. And as I always said, that therefore the police, when they perform their role in this matrix, when they terrorize us, when they brutalize us, when they kill us, when they intimidate us, they're doing their job. We shouldn't act like their job is to protect and serve. Their job is to protect property and serve the oligarchy, serve those who are in positions of power.
Well, now, one thing. Sorry to interrupt, Dhoruba, but there was one thing I just wanted to quickly throw in there, is that because even in what you're saying, it even in the response that I'm hearing you offer here, it seems to still, it's almost like we fall into the trap of accepting their false equivalence that they've created between what the state does and what is done as a response. In other words, police officers are, as you're talking about, officially state-sanctioned operatives who are armed and trained, legally sanctioned and defended by the state. To the extent that we understand what has happened in Dallas and in Baton Rouge, these are individuals not operating with any sort of organized effort. They're not part of a Black Lives Matter organized arms wing. They're not part of any. They're not being trained in effect to do this. In fact, to the extent that we understand what's happening, the accused shooters were trained by the United States military, not by some resistance movement. So I just wanted to just, I'm clear. Well, I know you get that. I just wanted to just throw that out there that this is a false equivalence. That it's like saying that there's an equivalence between the Israelis and the Palestinians, or
well,
but yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the fact that a civilian could take, that a person could take a civil service exam one day and the next day, literally be authorized to kill you or me as a law enforcement officer after going through some perfunctory training, should give us all pause for thought, because what we're talking about here, we're talking about the armed agents of the state. And what has the state become? The national security state has become anti-democratic. It has evolved into a corporate managed entity in which wealth and corporate influence and technology controls the politics and the direction of government. And so that the police are sworn to uphold the law as a matter of contract, that the police are sworn to uphold the law means that they have evolved into an adjunct. They're not just ordinary workers. First of all, they can't go on strike. They're forbidden from the only thing that they could do is collectively bargain. And they do have a union for this purpose, but the unions that the police have are not just ordinary unions. These are unions that exert an inordinate amount of political influence over our state legislatures, over our elected representatives, to the point where they could influence policies and quality of life issues in the black community that they don't live in. Now, they have rights as citizens to vote and to protest and to speak their minds, but they have a jurisdiction they live in. They live in their own political jurisdiction where they could speak out on community control of schools, where they could make certain local decisions and vote in the national election. They don't have no right to determine in our community the quality of life that we live, how our legal representatives enforce certain ordinances. None of these things are under the purview of the union. So the point I'm trying to get is, in a country that has deunionized and that has bitten off or ripped off the negotiating power of working class people, the most powerful union in the country is the police union. And to the point where it could influence international policy. The police has the New York Police Department, the LA Police Department, they have headquarters and offices in Tel Aviv, in foreign capitals. Okay? So we need to understand that we have come under sway of a national security state, a police state that is essentially anti-democratic. And the major instrument of reform, the major instrument of control of this by the state are the police. And so when we talk about policing in the black community, we have to figure in the whole history of white supremacy, the disempowerment of black people in black communities, redlining, gerrymandering, and all of these other forces that went into effect to create the type of colonial enclave that we have, that we call urban areas, that are predominantly black, predominantly poor, high unemployment, and policed by policemen who don't live in those communities, who come from outside of those communities, but exert an inordinate amount of political influence over those communities through their police union and through the intimidation of local government with their unions. Now, so what we're talking about then is when we talk about community control of police, we have to be talking about disempowering or dismantling this whole structure. How do we dismantle this structure? How do we take control over law enforcement? How do we empty out the prisons? These questions are being confused in this whole dialogue that's being thrown up now around law enforcement, and the police are being targeted, and they need a civil rights bill that if you talk bad about the police or threaten them, it's a civil rights violation.
And hate crime legislation.
It's a hate crime legislation.
Dhoruba, that is something I wanted to definitely ask you about in the few minutes we have left, because you have not famously enough talked in the past about the ability of popular media to separate in many ways the black community from supporting the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, elements of the community that should be supported in a variety of ways. Could you talk a little bit about how you're seeing the media response in the aftermath of these killings of police, and how it is attempting to reshape the conversation around Black Lives Matter, or even having activists in the broader Black liberation movement respond deferentially or empathically for the police, and talk about again what I think is a falsely built equivalence between what's happening on either side.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Jared. I like to go back to the Panther 21 case. In the Panther 21 case, the prosecutor and the judge were meeting secretly after court, behind our backs, and the prosecutor wanted to put a movie on in front of the jury as evidence that we were terrorists, that we were planning to destroy and blow up department stores on Easter Sunday, and that we were going to wreak havoc in the city, and that we were basically criminals, lowlifes, and terrorists. And they wanted to put on the Battle of Algiers. Now, the Battle of Algiers, for those who haven't seen it, and I urge your listeners and those who are on your show to go purchase the Battle of Algiers and look at it. The Battle of Algiers was a movie that was basically made in a documentary form, and it documented the Algerian Revolution. And one of the things that the Battle of Algiers showed, and one of the things why it appealed to many of us in the 60s, was because the Battle of Algiers showed how the struggle for liberation had politicized and radicalized the lowest elements of Algerian society, the criminal elements, the individuals who were out in the streets, what we would call the ones that's out in the streets shooting craps and killing people, and gangsters and thugs and hoodlums. That the struggle for liberation actually gave them a new lease on life, gave them some principles, and they turned their street smarts and their awareness and their street creds. They turned this on the French, and they became freedom fighters. And they became very effective soldiers in the struggle for Algerian liberation. And so what the prosecution wanted to show was that we were training, that the Black Panther Party was recruiting the lowest dregs of society, the so-called criminal elements, what we call the lumpen proletariat, the unemployed, those individuals who didn't have a job, those people who would rather punch a cracker in the face than punch his time clock. You know, these are the individuals that the Panther Party was appealing to. And once these individuals became politicized, once they got politics and community awareness and awareness of what they were doing, once they became socially conscious, they transformed themselves into freedom fighters, into soldiers fighting for the community instead of fighting each other, instead of destroying the community. And it was very important for the court, for the prosecution to show this to the jury, to explain to the jury that we were basically from lower classes of society, and that we had this ideology, this socialist and communist ideology that transformed us into terrorists. And this is exactly what they're trying to do now. And in each one of these cases where these brothers have took a hit for us, whether it's in Dallas, these individuals, when you look at how their parents talked about them, how that boy's parents talked about him. Said he was a good son. He was a good boy. His parents didn't denounce him and say he was some type of drunk, he was a criminal, he was always in trouble. They didn't say that. They said he was a good boy. You always looked out for them. You always took care. He was a good son. You know, and you know, black parents don't say that about their children if it's not true. You understand? And you could tell that this boy, he wanted to be a cop at one time, left the mass media. He went and joined the military. So he identified completely with the authorities and the agents of the state, and he wanted to be part of that. And then when he went into the military, he came out completely different, which tells us what they're trying to say is that he went into the military and he came out crazy. He went into the military and came out with good sense. That's what really happened. All of those dreams that he had of being a cop and being a soldier was shattered by his training in the military and his encounter with the real deal. Okay. And when he came home, he hated them with a passion. Okay. And it's the same thing with this other brother. But they always try to paint these individuals as troubled individuals, as individuals who had problems. But it was very difficult with these two kids because they didn't really have any criminal record. And they went into the military and they were trained by the military. So it was really hard to paint them into the corner as some crazy maniac who just hated cops and had a long criminal record and owned a gun illegally. All of the bases that they've touched, they had legal ownership of the weapons. They were trained by the U.S. government. Okay, they had no record of anti-hatred, anti-white or anti-police hatred before. Okay, all of these things are confusing them. And so they want to portray individuals who take up arms or take up defense against the black community, you know, right or wrong. They want to frame them as crazy individuals, as aberrations, as people who are insane. Now, this is the same government, by the way. This is the same president who wakes up every morning and signs a kill list. And drones go off and kill people. He killed over 150 something people in Somalia just the other month, which we don't hear a peep out of. Okay, this is a man that wakes up every morning and signs a kill list. This is a man that took the Nobel Peace Prize and gave a lecture on justifiable warfare. Yes, on how wars are justified. So for him to make a stand and take a position that under no circumstances should armed agents of the state that is murdering you should be targeted is an exercise in not only hypocrisy, but he thinks people are stupid.
Well, that last example, I got to put on the Nobel Prize Committee because they even said themselves we're giving him the Peace Prize in the hope that he'll earn it. You know,
well, that's the same reason that they always giving out the Peace Prize. This is why they split the Peace Prize between Mandela and de Klerk. I mean, where does that go? De Klerk? Right. Seriously?
No, but I'm just saying they were doing it not for work he had done, but for work they hoped he might do.
Yeah, they was hoping. But the Nobel Peace Prize was always used on that.
Right.
Look at the Vietnam Peace Treaty. They gave it to Kissinger.
Right, Kissinger. Right. So, but the other part of it is not only that is the popular media narrative turning to try to demonize acts of violence against police, but it's also looking to demonize the entire movement for Black Lives Uprising that's happening. It's also looking to get people representing either Black Lives Matter or some other formation to distance themselves from those kinds of actions. And to again create this false equivalency between victims of police violence and the police.
You know, just like the U.S. created ISIS and now ISIS is the #1 boogeyman. The U.S. has created these booted and suited buffoons running around in the streets talking about kill Whitey and slit their throats. And they created these individuals who, for decades now, literally for decades, have marched around at every event, at every media event. You understand, to project that image, of so-called black radicalism. But we know that's never been accurate, you know, and so now that now they're in a dilemma. They're forced to have to deal with these individuals that they allowed to march down all of these years to give the impression that they were in fact some type of black armed formation to justify what the right wanted to do. Now they have to really treat them like real. You see, so it's the chicken. The chickens are coming home to roost, and it's ironic. It's ironic that the very forces that they help create, images that they help promote, that in order to marginalize real Panther Party, in order to marginalize the real revolutionary movements, are now just coming back to haunt them, and that the public wants them to eliminate. So they created their own boogeyman. But right now, where we at right now is that Black Lives Matter and all of these other organizations who are dealing with various aspects of the criminal justice system, that we have to really build a national abolitionist movement, not a reform movement. We can't reform law enforcement as presently constituted in the police state. We have to abolish it. We're not talking about abolishing the idea, the concept of public safety. We're talking about abolishing law enforcement as is presently constituted and reorganizing it in a way that allows for restorative justice, that allows for community control and accountability, that places the police in the communities that they work in, that reestablishes the whole paradigm of law enforcement in this community away from the armed agents of the state that's controlled by elitist duopoly to people's police forces that are really in the community, that are from the community, and that protect the community. So we have to talk about building a new abolitionist movement. And one of the things I'm going to call for and have been calling for now is to revisit the idea, the concept of a united front against fascism. We need a united front of all the progressive and political people in this country who oppose militarized policing, who oppose the United States maintaining a perpetual war and intervention abroad, that oppose the mass incarceration, that oppose inferior housing and inadequate facilities for urban populations. We need to have a united front. We need to have this broad-based united front. Maybe it might turn into a third political party or an independent political party. That may be. But right now, we have to organize between now and November against the rise of fascism and white supremacy in this country behind the idea and the concept of law enforcement, hiding behind the roost that law enforcement is under attack. So therefore, we all have to unite behind the status quo in order to rid ourselves of these aberrant personalities who are out there attacking law enforcement. I think that those two brothers who have been killed in relationship to the demise of the police, to the murder of those police, should be appreciated by the black community. Just the same way we appreciate Denmark Vesey or Nat Turner. I think we need to understand that the policemen, you know, even some of the ones that Obama was making a eulogy for us now come out that one or two of them might have been white supremacists, you know, might have ties to white supremacy. So we have a black president giving a eulogy and asking for us to have a sympathy for the family of a white supremacist. So that's where we've come. I think we need to understand that we're at war, and that those individuals who are oppressing and murdering us without accountability are agents of the state, and they are soldiers. And in a war, you know, you don't mourn for the soldiers of the enemy. You just try to make sure that the enemy doesn't keep doing to you what he's been doing to you. And maybe when there's a peace treaty or we arrive at some type of understanding or some type of recognition of our humanity, then we could mourn together about the loss of lives on both sides. But right now, we have to mourn for our own. We have to build our own capacity to defend our communities against these racist attacks. And we have to understand with the mass media and with the mass dialogue around race, where it's going right now and how it's being used against movements like Black Lives Matter in order to curtail our critique and our opposition to white supremacy in this country. So, I think the more power to Black Lives Matter. I think that they have to broaden their areas of concern from police murder and police brutality to include the whole panoply of oppressive hierarchies and systems that denigrate Black lives in this country. So I think that we know now that the guns have drawn and police have bitten the dust, that it's always been a question of mind over matter. White folks didn't mind, and we don't matter. And now that the police have tasted some of the violence that they have visited on the Black community, now we're told that violence isn't the way. That people have to be brought to account for what they've done. And I agree with that. People should be held to account for what they do. But those who aren't held to account for the murder and brutality of Black folks by the system need to be held to account by the people. And so I think that we need to really build a united front and build a united effort in this country to curtail militarization of police and roll back the police state.
Well, Dhoruba, I appreciate you taking the time and helping us reset some of the parameters for the conversation, as always. And we'll look to catch up with you again, as unfortunately will probably be necessary very soon.
Yeah, right, unfortunately. Man, I hope you're catching me in Africa, man. I got to get out of here, man.